To finish part 1 of this course, so the React fundamentals, we'll review everything we have learned up until this point by building this brand new project called Eat and Split. Now, since this is a bonus practice project, it doesn't introduce any new concepts, and so you can safely skip it if you're pressed for time. However, in my experience, practicing these fundamentals of state, props, and events is absolutely crucial for your progress, and also to understand all the content that follows in the rest of the course. So if you can, make sure to build this project together with me now, or you can even try it completely on your own. So as always, let's start by setting up a new project and by taking a look at the final version of the app that we're going to build. So let's fire up our terminal or the command prompt in Windows, and then, as always, we navigate to the folder where we want the project to live. So for me, that's the desktop. For you, it can be any other folder on your system. And so now, as always, let's type npx create react app version 5. And then here, the name of the project is Eat and Split. So basically Eat and Split, but for short. And the name of the app is Eat and Split because this is the application that we are going to build. So it's an application where you can basically go out with a friend to have dinner or lunch, and then you can split the bill using this application. So here we have our list of friends, and we can also add some other friends down here. Let's say Jane, and then the friend will get a random image exactly like this. But as I said, the main functionality of this app is that you can share a meal with a friend, and then you can select that friend and share the bill with that friend. So for example, let's split a bill with Anthony. So let's say in total we spent 100 euros or $100, and let's say my part of the bill was 40. So I consumed food worth 40 euros, and so then that means that Anthony spent the other 60 euros. Then down here we can select who is paying the bill. So let's say that I am spending the bill, so that's you, but it could also be Anthony. So if I pay the bill, then after splitting the bill, Anthony should owe me 60 euros, right? So right now it says here that we are even, but now as I split the bill, Anthony owes me 60 euros, right? And it could also be the other way around. So let's just reload here to reset. So again, let's say the bill was 100 euro, of which I spent 40. And so now if Anthony pays the entire bill, I will owe him 40 euros, just as it says here. And of course, this logic will become more clear as we start building this functionality. But before we go do that, let's again split this UI into components, which is the first step of the thinking in React process. So here is the entire UI at once, which makes it a bit easier to split the UI into the components that we need to implement. Now, splitting a UI into different components can be a pretty subjective process, but we will learn some techniques about how to do this in the next section. But for now, in this case, I think that it's actually pretty obvious. So we have our list of friends here at the left side, and then in there we have a few friends themselves. So just like we did many times before, we have basically one component for the list of friends, and then we have one component for each friend itself. Then down here we have this form where we add new friends, and then here on the right side we have the form where we input the bill data and how it should be split. So pretty straightforward, and so let's now move on and start implementing some of these components statically, so without any state yet. Okay, so let's begin by rendering the list of friends. And to start, let's again come here to our starter files And then inside the eat and split folder, let's get app.js and index.css. So both of them, copy them, and I will just, as always, change the name here. And then inside the source, let's paste them. And so here we need to replace both of them because they already existed. And then let's delete all the junk files. So all of these, so that we end up only with app.js, index.css, and index.js. And so now let's get started by opening up this folder in VS Code. So index.js, here we need to, as always, clean up a little bit. And then also remove these files that no longer exist. Yeah, and that's it. So we have our index.css file, which as always, please feel free to explore it. But our main work is going to happen in app.js. And in fact, let's start by creating the app component, which is as always our main parent component. And here, this one, we need to export default because this is the component that index.js imports. Okay, so let's just return some div here. Hello, give it a save, and then let's open up the integrated terminal so that we can start up this app. Just make sure that you are in the correct folder here, and then just type npm start, which should then open a new tab over here. So let's wait for that. And indeed, here it is. And yeah, we got our hello, which is nicely centered. And that is because of the CSS that I provided, and which is, as always, automatically included right here already. So index.js is importing our index.css. And so that's why these styles are now automatically applied. Now back here in our code, we see that we have this initial friends array, which as always is simply an array of objects. And in this case of some friends, where each of them has an ID, a name, an image, which is coming from this URL here, and then the balance that we saw before. And more about what these numbers here mean in a minute. But for now, let's then start building that list of friends component. And here let's again build all the components right into just one file, so that we don't have to jump around all the time. So friends, list, and then here let's return a list, which for now will only contain list. And so now we will then include this component right here in the app. So friends, list, and no props. And here we will now place this into this div with a class name of app, which has been provided in the CSS file. And then also this should be inside a sidebar. So another div, class name sidebar. Okay. As always, it's a good idea to have the terminal open. And for now, all I'm doing here is to inspect the layout, basically. So here is that div with the app, which you can see is a grid container. And then we have the sidebar. And in there we have the UL, which you can also see is automatically a flex container. So all this layout stuff, of course, I already did it in advance, so that we can focus exclusively on React. But when you build your own applications in the future, then of course you will have to do all of that as well. But since this is not a CSS course, well, I already wrote it beforehand so that this is a lot faster. But anyway, let's now here actually render these friends that are in this array right here. So let's for now create a variable called friends, which we will simply set to the initial friends. And later on, we will then change this here. But for now, this is the array that we want to render. So let's say friends.map. And by now, you should be pretty familiar with this syntax. So each of the objects is a friend. And then for now, let's just render a list element. And then simply here with friend.name. And indeed, immediately we get Clark, Sarah, and Anthony. So those are our 3 friends. At least the ones that we want to share a meal with here in this example. Now, we could, of course, write the JSX right here inside this loop, but since we will have a lot of code for each of the friends, we should actually move that into a separate component. And so, let's do that and simply call it friend. Well, not like this. And so this friend should then probably receive the current friend object, right? And so therefore we accept that here as a prop. Okay, and now basically we can move that here. And then here what we want to render is that friend. And into that friend we pass the friend prop with the value of friend. Close it down, and then we should also, of course, specify the key prop. So this unique value that each of the elements in a list needs to have. And so for that, we actually have friend.id. And so as we reload, it looks exactly the same as before, but we have each friend inside its own component. And so then we start seeing here our component tree. Here we still have the error from before, but now it's gone. So we already have a small component tree with app, friends list, and then in there each friend with their unique key. But now let's keep moving here and let's actually build this list item here. So to make it a bit more complete. So first we have the image of the friend, which is at friend.image, and then we should also not forget the alt tag. So here let's just use the name of the friend. Okay, then we're using an h3 element for the name of the friend. And so that's looking already close to the demo right here. The only thing that's missing is this button and then this text here. Let me actually just reload this so that you can see that we have basically these 3 colors here. So whenever you owe your friend, then the text will be red. If they owe you, it will be green. And if you are even, then there is no styling applied. So let's implement that here. And so let's see what these numbers here actually mean. So here we have this balance property. And if that's a negative value, that means that you owe your friend. So in this case, you owe Clark 7. But if the balance between the 2 friends is positive like here, then that means that the friend owes you. And so let's now use that knowledge here to do this conditional styling and also this conditional text, because they are in fact different. So let's do friend.balance. So if that is negative, then let's render a paragraph with the class name of red, saying you owe, and then the name of the friend, dot name, and then friend dot balance, and then 0, which I don't really know how to type on the US keyboard that I'm using. And so let's just copy it from here. Or of course, you can also use the $sign like this. So that doesn't really matter. But what matters is that now we have this text here. Here we just want to remove that negative sign. So let's actually do math.abs, which stands for absolute, and that's a bit nicer. Okay, and now let's copy this 3 times. And so here I decided to basically use 3 times the AND operator for conditional rendering instead of a nested ternary. So we could also have done this condition right here with a ternary operator, and then in the else branch we could have another ternary operator for these 2 cases here. So friends balance greater than 0 or equal 0. But since these 3 cases are mutually exclusive, it's easier to simply have 3 times this AND. And so then only one of these will apply. But anyway, here it is green, and here we have no class at all. So no special styling. And here let's say you and your friend are even. Okay, and now here we need to also change the text to your friend owes you 20 euros. And so that's in fact exactly what we have here. Now all we are missing is the button here on the right side, and that's easy enough. Just button with the class name of button, and then select. And there we go. That's our list of friends. So we already built 2 of the 4 components that we identified, and so next let's build the 2 forms. So that's this form right here, and then the main bill splitting form. But we will start with this small and easy one down here. So back to our app. Let's create the next component, which is called form add friend. So here let's return a form element with the class name of form add friend. So just the same as the component name itself. Let's have one label which says friend name. Then let's here add one emoji with like 2 people, for example here, like this, and then the actual input field of the type text, and that's it. So again, we are just building the static part, so we have no state here. And so for now, this element here is of course not a controlled element yet. So here, next up, let's have the image URL. And again, I will use some emoji here. Let's go for this one. And then here, basically, we can just duplicate this line of text for now. So giving that a save. And finally, we need a button again. So that's this button element with the class name of button. So now we could just copy this here and paste it here, this class name button. So now we could just copy this here and paste it down here. But since we need a button like this multiple times throughout the user interface, we can just actually place this here into its own component. So we need to reuse this code right here. And so we just identified a new component that we need. All right. And here, let's do exactly what we did before. So we will specify the children prop, because that content of the button will come into the button via this children prop. So then we just display it here. So remember that the children prop here will be whatever is between the opening tag and the closing tag of calling the component. So now we say button, and then here, just as before, we say select. And so this here is then the children of this button. basically. So the children props right here will be select in this case. And so indeed, everything works just as before. And now we can then use the same button here, but this time the text will be add. All right, and we can't see the result of this yet because we of course need to include it also here in the app in the sidebar. So form, add friend, and there it is. So all we're missing now here is some button. So you see that here we have this button which says add friend. And so whenever we click this button, then the form will open. But again, for now, our app is not dynamic like this, but we still want the add friend button there. So right here between these two. And so we use again our button component. And so you see that this is a lot more comfortable than always having to use the normal button element with the button class attached to it. So here we used that class once right here, and then we can reuse that button with the class over and over again. Add friend. Well, that looks a bit weird. I believe that the button actually should be after. All right. So in fact, this is what we get here when we click. So the button changed the text to close and it is below. All right, let's just give ourselves a bit more space. And then let's move on to building this other main form over here. So that one is called the form split bill. Form split bill. And then let's again return a form element with the class name equal to the component name. So form split bill, but not in camel case, but in this other case that's more common in CSS. So first we have the title, split a bill with, and then here actually the name of the friend, which means that we will at some point need to pass in the friend object here into this component. But for now we can't really do that because we don't have a way yet of selecting one of the friends and then passing that friend object into the form. So that is what we will do later, but for now let's just place some placeholder here. Okay, and then before we keep going, let's include that form into the app, and that's outside the sidebar here. So just here inside app, form split bill. And there it is. So let's move back down here and then write the actual content of this form. And actually this is pretty similar to what we have here. So I'll just grab this part and paste that here. And then all we need to do is to change the text here. So first we have the bill value. Then use some money emoji here. Of course, here the text is also different. It's split bill. And then let's copy just this part, paste it here twice. So your expenses or expense. Yet another emoji. And of course you can split those if you don't want. And now here the expense of your friend. So I'll again just use X for now. And then we want that emoji of two people that we had before to symbolize that this is the friend. Okay, nice. Let's see. And in fact, the only thing that we are missing is now this select here. And also this input right here should be disabled. So when we add something here, for example, our expense is 40, then we should not be allowed to change Clark's expense, because otherwise these two values wouldn't add up to the total bill value. So let's do that. So here we can simply use the disabled attribute. So that's very simple. And you saw that it become grayed out there. And now let's then write that select. So here another money emoji for specifying who is paying the bill. And then here we have a very simple select element with only two options. So option 1 is you. And here let's actually specify the value also as user. And then in this other one as the friend. And then here we again want the friend name. So let's use X. And nice. Yep, that works. And so with this, we actually finished building the static part of the application. And so next up, we are finally ready to start adding some dynamics. So to add some state here. Let's now conditionally display and hide the new friend form. So basically the functionality that we're looking for is clicking on this button will display the form and change the text to close. And then when we click again, it will just hide the form again. So let's think about this. Something should change in the UI as we click this button, right? Or in other words, the UI needs to be re-rendered as a result of the event of clicking that button. And so that is a very good sign that we need a new state variable. So let's go back here and then let's think about where we actually need that state variable. Well, basically we want to display and hide this form here based on that state variable. And where do we do that? So where do we display the form? Well, it is right here. So right here in the app component. And so this is where we now place our new piece of state. So let's call it show add friend and set show add friend. We could, of course, have used some shorter variable names here, but you shouldn't be afraid of making your variables pretty descriptive. So use state, and by default, the form should be hidden. And so we set this to false. And once again, it's important that VS Code automatically imported use state from React. So make sure you have that line right there. So we have the first step of creating the state variable with the use state hook. Next up, let's use it. And we will use it to conditionally render this piece of JSX. So just this one component here. And for that, we can again use the AND operator with short circuiting. So show add friend and form add friend. And so now it is gone. So that's no longer here, but if it was true, then it should show up. And indeed, there it is. Okay, and with that in place, let's now go to the third step, which is updating the state. So when do we update the state? Well, it is when we click here on the button. So that's this button right here. And so let's again specify the onClick handler. Now, of course, this button component here doesn't have the onClick property, right? Only the native HTML elements, so for example this div here, or the actual button does have the onClick property. So let's actually cut it from here and place it a bit closer to the app because, or actually even before, because this is our only reusable component. So let's place it a bit separately. But anyway, as I was saying, this button here can of course accept the onClick prop because it is an HTML element basically. Not technically, but we can think of it as that. So here we can say onClick, but again, our custom button component doesn't have that prop. However, of course, we still want to specify onClick here. Right? And so what we can do is simply, well, accept that here as a prop. And this is actually exactly what we did when we built our first reusable button in the steps component. Remember that? But anyway, now here it's as simple as then passing that onClick right here. And now all we have to do is to pass in the function that we want to be executed when the click happens. So we will create a new function called handle show add friend. So let's copy that. And then, as always, let's create a new event handler function right here. So what should happen here? Well, we want to change the show add friend state, and for that we use the setter function. And what we want to do is to always set the show add friend to the opposite as it is right now. Or in other words, the new state will depend on the current state. And so, as always, or not always, but as many times, we use a callback which gets as an input the current state, and I will just call it show here. And then the new state will be the opposite of that. Again, any name here would work, but well, we don't have to write the entire thing here. Let's just go for something short. And if I click here, beautiful. So that works perfectly. And now all we have to change is the text here when we click. So now when the form is open, it should say close. And so that's just some more conditional rendering right here in the button actually. So let's wrap this here into JavaScript mode, and then let's say show add friend. If so if it is currently true, then we want to display close. And otherwise, then this other string here, which says add friend. Give it a save, and yes, it says close. And now back to the original add friend. Nice. So we are now able to display and hide the form, but of course the form doesn't work yet. And so let's take care of that in the next video. Let's now implement the first feature of our app, which is the ability to add new friends to the list. So let's come here to the form add friend component, which is where that is going to happen. So the first thing is that we need to get the value of these input fields into our application. So right here into this component. And how do we do that? Well, as we already know, we use controlled elements, where we will have one piece of state for each of the inputs, and then as the user types something here, that value here of the input field will be synced with that state. So let's do that, and let's write name and set name. And then, as always, we call our use state. And let's immediately do the same thing also for the image. And now all we have to do is to wire up these states to our input fields. And we have done this many times at this point, so this is hopefully nothing new for you. So again, we first define the state, then we set the value to that state. So basically controlling that input field, and then we listen to the change event with the onChange listener. And what we do is to take the event and then update the state using that event dot target dot value. All right, and let's see. That should already be working. Let's come here to the, to the form itself. And then we should see the state down there. Well, somehow that doesn't really work. Let's try that again. And well, yeah, here it is. So that's the state, simply my name written wrong. But yeah, let's now do the same thing here in this other input field. So value, image, and then on change, set image to e.target.value. All right, then we get some error here for some reason. So let's just reload, get some more space here. And then we should, of course, see this state already in the component. And there it is. Nice. Now, actually here, I want some default already. So let me show you what exactly that is. So by default, we already want this part here of the image URL. So let's copy that, and then let's come down here. And so by default, this will be our image. And then when we actually create the new friend, we will add something to it in order to make it unique. But anyway, now the next step is here to listen for the onSubmit event. So again, just like we have been doing before. So this submit event will get fired whenever we submit the form by clicking there on that button or hitting enter while we are in one of these fields. And so then that submit event gets fired off, and then we call the function, which will be handle submit. So then let's create that function, handle submit. And remember that this function here gets called by React with the event object. And so then the first thing that we have to do is to prevent the default action, which would be to reload the entire page, which is not what we want in a single page application like we are building. And so the event handler function for a form, so on an onSubmit, always needs the event.preventDefault. And now let's create a new friend object so that we can then add that to our array. So that should have name, image, and the balance should start at 0, of course. So no one owes anyone anything. We also want an ID. And let's create the ID using the built-in browser crypto.random UUID. And so this is a very good way of generating random IDs right in the browser. So this is not an external packages, but it won't work in older browsers. But here we don't care about that. We just want to make this work. And so with this, we have a new friend. Let's log it to the console here for now, just to see that everything is working correctly. Give it a save. Let's reload here. And now in the console, we should see that object. And indeed, there it is. So balance. And here, I didn't call the function. I just passed in the function, which of course is not correct. Let's try that again. And now here it is. So this is the random ID that was generated. Here is the image and the name and the balance. Now, as I was saying, I actually want to now add something to this image. So to this string that we already have as a default. So let's create a template literal here. And so now I want to do equal and then the ID. Well, yeah, of course we cannot do that. So let's create this here outside as another variable. So const ID equals this, and then down here, just like this. So the way that this works, and the reason why we are adding this ID here, is that this string here, this URL, if we open it, it will basically give us a small image with the size of 48. But when we reload, it will each time give us a different image. But of course, we don't want that. So we want each image to be fixed basically to the person. And the way we can do that is to attach something here. So it doesn't matter what string, but now each time that we open this URL, we will always get the exact same image. So it will always be this one here. And as I reload, we should get exactly the same. Well, that didn't work actually, but maybe that's just because someone else has already used this. But yeah, this here should be pretty unique, and then we should always get the same image. Now there's just some small changes that we should do here. Of course not here, but here. So first, after we submit the form, then we should go back here to the defaults. So let's do that. So set the name back to empty and set the image back to, well, to just this here. Because of course the user could want to input some other URL here. It doesn't have to be this one. It's just the default that we're using so that we don't have to write this manually each time. So if we try this again, then you see that it gets empty. And here it should then also go back to the default. Now, if we submit this right now without anything, then of course something will still get logged to the console. So all of this here, all this code is still executed, but we actually don't want that. So let's add some guard clause here saying that if we have no name or we have no image, then return immediately. And so in this case, nothing is going to happen. So with this, nothing happens, but if we have a name, then of course the code works. Okay, so the form now works, but now comes the harder part. So how do we now actually get this object that we logged here onto our friends list? Well, let's think about it. So each time that we add a new friend, we want that friend immediately added here to the list. So to that UI right here. So we want something to happen in the UI, or in other words, we want the UI to render. And so once again, that's a clear sign that we need some state. So that is pretty clear, but now we need to figure out where to place that piece of state. And for that, let's take a look at our component tree here once again. Yeah, let's see all of it. So our friends list component here is the one that is going to display the friends, right? However, it is the form add friend where we want to update that list of friends because, well, of course, this is where we add a new friend. So the update happens here, but the state itself is needed here in this sibling component. So what does that sound like? Well, it sounds as though we have to lift the friends state up here into the app, right? Because this way, both of these components, or actually all of them, can get access to that friends state. So let's do that. And first of all, let's go to the friends list itself, where right now we have this friends here set to initial friends. And so now let's get rid of this part. And instead, let's create a lifted up state variable in the parent component, which is in this case just app. So friends and set friends and then use state. And what should the initial value be now? Well, not just an empty array, because we actually want these three friends here to be visible at the very beginning. I mean, it probably doesn't make a lot of sense for all the users to have these three friends, but let's just say that this is how it works. So let's just say that these friends are basically the default friends of everyone, because this is just a demo anyway. Now here then, of course, immediately get the problem that inside the friends list, friends is no longer defined. So we need to fix that by now passing in friends as a prop. So giving this component access to the state by passing it down as a prop. And so here we receive that, and then the component will be happy. So it's back to having this array, and then everything works again. Great. So that's one part. And now we need to give this form here the ability to add new friends. So to update that friends array. And we could do that in two ways. So we could directly pass the setFriends function into the, where is it? Yeah, here. So right here into this form. But let's keep all the event handler functions right here. And so let's instead create a function called handle add friend. And then this function here will use that setFriends function. And then we pass this one here down instead. Okay, so let's use setFriends. And of course, this function here then needs to receive a friend object. So that's the new friend that we created down there in that component. And then here, all we do is to take the current friends, which again could be called anything here in this new function. And then we create a brand new array, spread the current friends in there, and add the new one at the end. So again, we do it like this, basically creating a brand new array instead of using like the push function, because that would mutate the original array. So it wouldn't create a new one, and so React in that case would not re-render. I mean, sometimes it might actually work, but it's not supposed to, because in many situations it will actually not work. So don't do that. Don't mutate original arrays, because React is all about immutability. That's also the reason why we are not allowed to mutate props. Remember that? So always creating new arrays here. And the way we do that for adding a new element to an array is by creating a brand new one like this, spreading all the current elements, and then adding the new one to the end, like this. So just like we have been doing. And now let's pass that in here. So on add friend, like this, we pass in handle add friend. So again, we are using this on prefix here, just like React does it for the events, like on click, on change, on mouse over. And so here we create our owns, basically like on add friend. So as if this was also an event. Okay, let's copy this. So this should already be working now. And so then let's come down here, pass that in, and instead of logging it to the console, we now want to call this function with the new friend. And this should now work, actually. So we have wired up everything correctly. So we have our shared state here, so our lifted up state, which is now available to the friends list. And we then update that state down here in this component. Well, not this one, but it's not in the tree, of course. But now it will be in the tree. So this was actually a good learning moment. So basically seeing that the component that was not in the UI is of course also not in the component tree here, right? So now it is, but when I close it, you see that it disappears from here. Okay, but now it is back. And so again, this is where we will update the friend state and in a way do some child to parent communication. So the parent being the app component. And so then as soon as that state is updated, it's again passed down into the list, which will then re-render. So let's try. And there it is. You and Jonas are even. So this should now create some image there. It always takes some time for some reason. But yeah, that worked beautifully. And we can keep adding more and more. And then this updates the state exactly in the way that I have explained before. Here we update, then that propagates the update basically to the app component, which will then pass it down in the list, which will re-render as a result. Nice. There's just one small thing that we want to do, which is each time that we add a new friend, so that this form is submitted, we then want to immediately close that form. So make it disappear again. So that's easy enough. But let's think about it a little bit. So do you think that we should do that here? So in this component here, is this where we should close the form after we're done? Well, not really, because this part here, this form, is actually not responsible for showing itself or not. So as long as this component is actually included in a component tree, it will be visible. Right? So instead, who controls whether this component is visible or not is the app component by using this state. Right? And so we can use this handler function to not only set the new friend state, but also to hide the form again. So all we have to do is set show add friend and set that to false. So here the state doesn't depend on the previous state. So here we simply want to always set it to false. And yeah, we got the new friend and the form is hidden. And so this actually completes this feature. So just make sure that you take now a minute to review the code that we wrote here. So in particular, the lifting up state and how we then wired everything together. And then once that's done, we will start working on actually making this main part of the application work as well. Now, in order to make our form work, the first thing that we need to do is to add the ability of the user selecting a friend. So whenever we click here on select, it will then open up the form with the information about this user. So here is the name of the user. And yeah, well, that's really all that we need. And then here you also see that the selected friend is marked here with this orange background and the button text changes to close. And then if we click on another one, then the information of this friend is passed in here. So basically what we want is that whenever we click select on one of the friends here in this list component, we want that information to pass here into this form component. So how do we do that? Well, basically we want this component right here, so this friend component, we want it to communicate with this form component, right? So to basically pass it some data. But as we can see here in our own component tree, those are actually sibling components. And actually even worse than sibling components, because the friends are inside the friend list, and friend list itself is then a sibling component of the form. But in any case, since these two now need to share some state, so basically they need to share this friend object that was selected here, we need again some lifted up state. And so the first common parent is again the app component. And so let's in here create a new piece of state called selected friend. And then set selected friend. And here by default, we will have null. So basically no object at all, which means that no friend is selected. And now let's start using this new piece of state here, because when there's no friend selected, which is currently the case, since this is null, then we don't even want this form here to show up, right? So let's go here into our JSX and let's conditionally render this form. So based off the state, let's say selected friend and then the form. So right now selected friend is null, and so the end operator will short circuit and will not display anything. And so then it's gone. Great. So we created the state, we used it already a little bit, and now we need a way of updating it. And so that, of course, is going to happen whenever this button here is clicked. So let's actually create a handler function, again, right here in the component that actually owns that state. So a function that we will then pass down via props, as we have been doing also with the other functions. So let's call this one handle the selection. And so this one should receive a friend object. So all this will do is to set the selected friend to the friend object that it will receive. All right, and so this is the function that will get called whenever we click on this button. And so then whatever button is clicked, the associated friend object will be set as the currently selected friend. All right, so let's pass that down. And here this is getting a bit confusing. Let's just add some spacing between all of these. And so let's pass, let's say on selection will be handled with handle selection. Okay, and now in the friends list, we need to receive that. So on selection, but it is actually not even this component that needs this, but the friend itself. So here we can just pass it through this component by saying on selection as a new prop here should then be passed here into the friend. All right, and so now this is where we will use this function. So that's right here on this button. So on click, and then let's specify our function here because we want to call now, well, not this. So we want to call on selection and pass in the current friend. And that's it. So whatever button here is now going to be clicked, it will take the current friend and it will save it into the selected friend state. So that's the same logic as before with some lifted up state. Then we create a handler function which updates that state, and then we pass that handler function down via props. And so now when we click here, that should actually immediately open up the form. And indeed it does. All right. Now there's still some things missing, but this is already great. Now what we need to do next is to then actually pass that selected friend object here into the form, so that then here we can display the correct name. So that doesn't sound too difficult. And so it's right here. So selected friend should be equal to selected friend. Then let's come down here. Let's receive that selected friend, and then we can use that here. So selected friend dot name, and immediately you see Sarah there. So that's great. Let's just use it here in the other places. So that's right here and right here. Nice. And if we click another one, watch what happens. Yes, it changes to Anthony or to Clark or whatever other friends that we have in our list. Beautiful. So that's working already really nice. Now the next step is to then basically mark this one here also as selected and change the button text here to close. So just as we have here. So you see that here we have this nice background, and yeah, the text has changed as well. So how do we know inside of each friend if it is currently selected? Well, first of all, we will have to pass in the currently selected friend. And so then we can compare that with each friend. So with the friend itself. But that's easier to understand in code. So, as I said, let's come here into the app and let's pass the currently selected friend in as well. So selected friend equals selected friend. And now as we save, Prettier puts each of these props into its own line. So this makes it a lot easier to see what's going on here. But anyway, the friends list now receives the selected friend. So let's add that here. And then once again, we don't need that directly here in the list, but we will need it inside the friend. So we just pass that through here. selected friend equals selected friend. And by the way, whenever this happens, so whenever we have a component that doesn't actually need the prop, but all it does with the prop is to pass it down into one of its children, we say that we are prop drilling. So in this case, that's not a big problem, but sometimes we need to pass some prop through like 5 or 6 levels. And so then it becomes really problematic, and we then need to solve that problem. But here, that's no issue. I just wanted to already prepare you for what's ahead, basically. So at some point, we will talk about that in detail. But anyway, now here we can compare that selected friend with the current friend, basically. So let's say is selected. And so here we want a Boolean. And so we can simply do selected friend dot id equal to friend dot id. And that's it. So now we can use this to conditionally define a class name here. And here, let's now use JavaScript mode again so that we can say is selected, then add the class of selected, and if not, then no class at all. All right, and you see, well, actually, you don't see. This is the demo app, but you see it here. So this already got now the nice background color. And if we select this one, then it changes here to this other friend. And so that's simply because this ID here of this friend is now exactly the same ID of the one that we have selected. And now all we need to do is to change that text there for closing. And so that's down here. So is selected, and if so, it should be close, and otherwise select. And yeah, there it is. Great. So that's working, but what's not working is that when we click here again, is that this is not closed. And that makes sense because nowhere we are saying that when we click here again, that the state should be back to null. And so that's what we need to do next. So here where we handle the selection, basically when there is already a friend selected, so which means that this here is open, then when we click here again, we want to change the selected friend back to null. So back to the initial state, basically. And so here now we need to do something else. Let's just comment it out. And so now this will actually depend on the current state. So let's just call this the selected. So the currently selected here in this callback is just called selected so that we don't have to write so much. Then here we can say if the selected.id is equal the friend.id that we're passing in, then let's set it back to null. And otherwise, then set it to the passed in friend. All right, so whenever the currently selected, let's actually change this here to cur, which stands for current. So if the currently selected.id is equal to the friend.id, so the friend that is passed in, then that means that it is actually open. So that right now the form is being displayed. So in that case, we want to actually close it. And so then we set it back to null. Right? So let's try that. And well, we got a bug. So let's see what that is. And yes, this is what I was expecting. So we cannot read the properties of null right here in the friend. So right here. And so that is because right now the selected friend is null, isn't it? And so on null, we do not have the ID property. And so therefore, then this breaks. But fortunately for us, in modern JavaScript, we have optional chaining. And so this is very easy to solve. And if you're not familiar with the syntax, then just go back to the section where I review essential JavaScript. Now here, this friend will always exist. And so here we don't need optional chaining. So we will never run into problems there. But let's do the same up here as well. Because again, the currently selected does not always exist. I mean, sometimes it's null, and then this doesn't work. Okay, so we select it, then we select this, and if I click again, which is what we just implemented, then beautiful. The form disappeared, we have no bugs here, and everything is back to normal. Great. And now, just to finish, let's handle one small edge case. So let's say that we decided to add a friend, but then for some reason we don't. We're not interested anymore in this. And then we click here to open up this form. So then we have both of them open at the same time, which looks a bit weird. And so let's automatically close this form here whenever we open this one. And so this will then again show you the huge power of state. So all we need is one line of code right here where we handle this click. So all we have to do here in handle selection is to select the friend first, and then we set show add friend always to false. So let's reload that. So I open the form, then I select Anthony, and so that closes this one and opens the one that we're interested in. Great. And with this, we are now ready to actually make this form here dynamic right in the next video. The next step to making our form work is to take the input elements that we already have and make them controlled elements. So elements that are entirely controlled by React components. And since we already know how that works, as we have done it so many times already, let's get right to it. So the first one is for the bill itself. So set bill, and we use state with an empty string. And we are using an empty string because these are input text elements. And so this is how it needs to work. Next up, we have one for the expense paid by the user. So let's call this one paid by user, and then set paid by user, use state, again empty, and then also one for the select here. So const who is paying, and set who is paying. Use state, and here we start with the default of user, which is one of the values that we have here in our two options, right? Now it would be a bit more elegant to use a true false value here. For example, we could call it is paid by user, and then that could be either true or false. But that's a little bit difficult to implement with the values coming from here. So we can't really pass true or false here. That doesn't really work. And so we just do it like this. Okay, and now once again, we will wire everything up. So I will do it here as fast as I can. And you could even pause the video if you wanted and just do it yourself. So e.target.value. Okay, and now why not just copy and paste this here? So value is now paid by user, and then set paid by user, and the same thing, well, not here, but here. So here it's who is paying, and then set who is paying. All right. So let's write something here. And then we should see it here in our component tree that the state is exactly what we expected. Or actually, we should convert these two here to numbers. So let's select this one and actually also the next one. So we can do everything at the same time. And if I then reload here, then, yeah. Oh, well, only this one has been converted. And, oh, okay. I did a mistake here. So, just to see that it's normal that this happens. So I selected the wrong one there. So let's try that one more time. Because of course, this is really important that we get numbers here and not strings. And yeah, that's correct. And if I select this one, then it is the friend. But now, what about this one here? So why is there no value here? Well, here we actually don't need a state because we cannot write anything here into this field. Also, this expense of the friend can actually easily be computed from the bill value minus the expense of the user himself. So that sounds like derived state, right? And I'm placing it right here after paid by user, just so they are in the same order as in the UI. So paid by friend is simply the bill value minus what has been paid by user. But actually we should be careful with this because in the beginning the bill is just a string. So this doesn't really work. So let's first ask if there is a bill, well then the result of the operation should be this. And if not, then let's also make it an empty string. And now we just need to go down here and use it. Well, right here. So here we will only specify the value, but not the handler. So paid by friend. And nice, there is our 150. And if we change this, let's say to 150, then of course each time that the state is updated, so each time that we write something new, the state is updated and then the component re-renders. So this function will get executed again, and then this derived state, so this variable here will be reset as well. So it will take these values here again, calculate its thing, and then store the value in this variable. So then that gets displayed here. But now there's just one problem with this, because let's say we write 1500. So that's not really correct, because then here Clark's expense is negative. So basically we need to ensure that our expense is at most equal to the bill value itself, but never greater than it. So let's come down here and do that right here. So we could actually extract this into its own function, but let's just do it all in line here. So we have the number here, so the paid value basically. Let's copy this because we will need it again. But for now, let's test if this value is greater than the bill. So if it is, then we basically don't want to change the state. So we can just use then the current paid by user again. But otherwise, then we actually want the new state to become, well, what we have written there. So that's e.target.value. Okay, so again, we check in the new value that has been written into the field and we compare it with the bill. And if it's larger than the bill, then we will just basically reset the value here to paid by user, which is already the value that was in there before. But if not, so if it's a valid value, then we just use it here. So this will then become the new state. And so now let's just quickly reload here. Let's say 200. And so now, as I type some other number here, you cannot see it, but I'm typing it, then this value here is not updated. Great. So we converted our form here into a basically controlled form where all the elements are now controlled elements. So what we need to do next is to add the logic of actually splitting the bill and then updating the balance between the two friends. So updating the value that we can see right here. Now that's a bit more work, and so let's actually leave that for the next video. But before we go there, I actually want to quickly show you what happens when we click on one of these other friends. So let's click here, and you see that the state has not been reset, right? So the state that we had here before is exactly the same when we click on other friends. Now, with the knowledge we have at this point, we are not yet ready to fix this and also not really ready to understand it. All I can say for now is that this happens because this component is rendered in exactly the same place in the component tree as before. I mean, when I click here again, then the same component is rendered again in exactly the same position. So the component doesn't disappear in the meantime, and so therefore it is not really re-rendered. And so that means that the state then stays the same. Of course, if I close this and select the same friend again, then since the component has disappeared and then appeared again, then the state is reset. But again, if I do this and select another one, then the component doesn't really completely re-render, at least not the state in it. So the state is not reset in this case. But don't worry about that for now, as we will fix this later once we have a bit more knowledge about some deep fundamental things that happen inside React. All right, so just wanted to show you this, but now let's move on to the next video and actually finish up this project. Welcome to the last video in this section, where we will now finish up the application that we have been building. So in the last lecture, we already made all our elements here controlled elements. And so now all we have to do is to listen for the submit event here on this form and then handle it accordingly. So that's easy enough. It's always in the same way. So on submit, then typically we write a handle submit function right here. So function handle submit, which will receive the event. And then, as always, we need to do prevent default. All right, and let's start by adding some guard clauses here. So basically preventing this form from being submitted if there is no bill or if there is no value paid by the user. So in this case, just return and do nothing. Okay, but if there is a bill or a value paid for the user, well then, now it's time to actually split the bill. Now in practice, that means basically that the balance of the user in question will be updated. So of the friend here in question, I mean. So whenever we split a bill, it means that this value right here will be updated, right? So something is clearly happening on the screen. However, does that mean that we now need a new piece of state? Well, actually no, because we already have these friends here in our state, and all we're doing is to update them, right? So basically all we will do is to update this balance value that is displayed here. So let's come again to the component where that state is living. So this state right here, and then let's write yet another handler function. So function handle split bill. And this one will simply receive a value. So in this case, there is no need to pass in the entire friend because we already know which friend is going to be updated. And so that's exactly the current friend, right? But for now, let's actually just log this value here to the console. So we will take care of this more complex updating logic at the end. So for now, let's just pass this handle function here into the component. So right into this component here. So on split bill will be handled by handle split bill. Okay. Then let's come down here again and let's then receive on split bill. And then finally, we can use that here in order to update the state. Well, for now, we will only log something to the console, but we will take care of updating in a minute. For now, we first need to figure out exactly with which value we will update the friends balance. And this is actually the most confusing part of this whole application, even more confusing than all the React stuff itself. So remember that the bill can basically be paid either by you, so the user, or by the friend. And so based on that, we now need to set a value. So we will use the ternary operator here for that. And so we say who is paying is equal to the user, which is basically you. So remember that negative numbers in the balance are owned by you, so by the user. And positive numbers means that your friend is owing you. Therefore, if this here is the situation, so if you are paying, then they will be owing you their part. And so therefore, this is a positive number. So the value here will be paid by friend. And in the opposite case, so if your friend is paying, then you will actually own your part, so the paid by user part, and it's going to be a negative value. Again, because the negative values are the ones owned by you. So minus paid by user. And so then inside this function here later, we will add that value that we just returned here onto the balance. So once we're done with all that, I promise this will be a lot easier to understand. But anyway, let's now come here to our console. Let's just quickly reload here, and then let's just try any of these. So let's say the bill is 200 euros, and your part is 50, and Sarah's part is 150, and you are paying the bill. And so the result is then a positive 150, which will be added on top of the balance. So it's plus 150 because it's your friend who is owing you. And so, yeah, those are the positive numbers. If we change this here to Sarah, then it will become minus 50. So that is your part, which you are then owing to your friend. And so then it becomes minus and your part. So minus 50. All right. So our function here is now receiving that value. And so now let's update our friend state. So set friends. And once again, the new array that we will return here will be based on the current friends array. And so here we need that callback. And then what we're going to do is friends.map, because we want to return a new array with the exact same length as the current one. So that's how we always do it when we update an object in an array. So we have done that many, many times before. And so if the code I'm going to write next is a bit strange to you, then just feel free to go back to one of those lectures. But anyway, let's now loop actually over this array in which each of the objects is of course a friend. And so let's then update the friend whenever the current friend.id is equal to the selected friend.id. And so here's what I mentioned earlier, which is that we already know which of the friends is getting updated, right? Because we already hold that in the state. So if this is the case, so if the current friend is the one that we want to update, then, well, here we are going to return an object which will contain all the elements, so all the properties of the current friend, but we want to override the balance property. And we will override it with friend.balance, so the current value plus the value that we received. And that's it. So I just saved here by accident, and so immediately we get an error because we're missing the second part of the ternary operator. So here in the second branch of the ternary operator, in case that the current friend is not the one that we want to update, we simply return that friend unchanged. And with this, we should now have a working application. So let's again use the values that we already know, so that we used before. And let's actually still log the value here to console, just so we can better understand what is happening here. All right. So remember that before Sarah was owing us 20 euros. And so now see what happens. Now she owes us 170. So that's the 150 that we got now on top of the 20 euros that she was already owing us before. And again, that's because I am paying the entire bill here. So it's like I'm lending her. So I'm paying her 150 euros, which is her expense. So her part of the bill. So if we had now a 100 euro bill where my expense is 90 and then she pays it, then she pays my 90 part of the bill. And so then this should become here 100 and, or actually it should become 80. So let's wait for it. And indeed, now it's 80. And the same logic can be applied here. We just need to now reset these values here. So let's say we have a bill of 20. And since Clark is owing me 7, or actually you owe Clark those 7 euros, let's now use that here. So here I'm using 13 so that Clark's expense is 0. And then if I pay, we should be even after this. And indeed, now we are even. Great. So this can be a bit confusing, but this is also not really what matters. What matters is all the knowledge, or at least all the practice that we just gained from building this amazing project. There's just one small thing missing, which is that here the state is not clearing. So we have two options now. It's to clear the state here in the form, but even better, and which is what I actually do here, is after this is done, so after the bill is split, it will automatically close the form again. And so that's very easy to do, right? Let's just get rid of this. And then here, thanks to the power of state, once again, we can just say set the selected friend to null. And that's going to be it. So once again, very, very easy to do with the power of state. Imagine doing this kind of stuff with vanilla JavaScript. You would probably become crazy at some point. So with this, it's super straightforward. Let's just reload here. Now let's use Anthony here. Let's say 150. Our part was like this, and it doesn't really matter. But as I click here, you see that the form disappeared, and this value here, of course, has changed. Great. And with this, our application is feature complete, and you just added one more small React app to your portfolio. So very, very well done. You're doing great progress here. Now, in order to become even better, as we finish this first part of the course, it's very, very important that you build a lot of similar and small projects just like this one. So it can be something like a shopping list, or a simple goal tracker, or something like a conference speaker list where users can select which talks they want to go to. So just some small app like this. It doesn't have to be super fancy or original, of course. All that matters is that you practice the skills by writing the code without following a tutorial. So without following anyone writing the code for you. So I really advise you to not move on to part 2 before having built something small completely on your own. And then, once you are done with that, no matter how long that takes, I hope to see you very soon in that part 2 of this course.